Hey, Christian, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you, Ken. Good to be here.
Yeah, Christian, I'd love to get to know you a little bit. I'm a fan of your work, but don't know you personally. Can you give us the backstory, maybe early career, where you grew up, wherever
Yeah,
you want to start is fine.
yeah, sure. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, which is where I live now still. But I've spent a lot of time all over the world. Part of what got me, or a major driver that got me interested in leadership and organizational dynamics, was working in international disaster relief. So I was working in a lot of different places, and natural disasters, or following wars or different kinds of conflicts, or actually even in ongoing wars. But I began to see that I could work in relatively secure areas in very, very well-funded projects. And if we were not led well and our teams didn't get along with each other well, it was very hard to succeed, and it was a very rough experience. The emotional toll of those projects was very hard. On the other hand, you could work in active conflicts, in underfunded projects, in very austere environments. And you could succeed and accomplish a lot if we were led well and the teams got along well. And they were, fun's the wrong word, but you felt good. You felt good
Yeah.
being there. You felt motivated. You felt proud of what you did. You didn't feel like you just got, like, fried out by the end of the project.
How'd you get
And
into
so,
that originally? Sorry, not to interrupt, but
yeah, well, I
what
originally
led
was
you?
involved in ministry, and I was working in different places, and I ended up in the Middle East eventually. And in that, I became interested in what I saw in disaster relief and the ability. I was just attracted to I think, working in some of those environments and the ability to directly meet needs that were acute. And so I just became interested in that whole thing and pursued that, and eventually ended up being hired by an agency in Switzerland, and
But it's
kind
so
of got.
interesting, but like your perspective on leadership. I mean, that is such a what a great venue to vet out leadership, right? Because I mean, from what you're saying, you could be in a combat zone with a great leader, and people generally felt safe and or motivated, and you could be in a perfectly safe neighborhood with a lousy leader, and they could feel, I guess, unsafe if I'm using the right word, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. You have an army background, right? I was looking at
Yeah,
you. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And so I think you probably are familiar with that.
yeah.
I don't know what your full military experience was, but I did see that the circumstances that you were working in were less important to your experience and your ability to be successful than the quality of leadership and the quality of the team dynamics. And when those things were in place, it was really, I won't quite say you're unstoppable, but it was pretty close. Like, there was a lot that you could do. And so I just became fascinated with it. I thought the work we were doing was important enough that in those environments, um, there's a strong tendency to place people in positions in leadership because you're the last person standing.
Yeah.
You're there,
You're
and so
it.
you get the
Yeah.
job. And so a lot of people were on the wrong seat, probably on the wrong bus. Not necessarily any fault of their own, but just, you get hired for the right position, and then somebody leaves or can't stay any longer, or whatever the issue was. And you get these promotions unintentionally, kind of warm body promotions.
Yeah.
And so it would get complicated. Anyways, I thought it was important enough work that we shouldn't be leaving success or failure to just kind of random chance of who happened to have the job. And so I really became curious about it and started studying leadership, studying team dynamics, organizational dynamics. Part of it too is, in that field, a lot of times you don't have the luxury of spending a year doing strategic planning with the community and doing in-depth analysis. You have to jump in. You're there for a very short amount of time. You have to talk to all of the important people in a culture you don't know, in a language you don't understand. You have to very quickly assess the situation and come up with recommendations that are hopefully close enough to being helpful and not damaging, and then execute on those. And I thought these tools that I was learning in that environment, I thought could be applied to organizations as well. And I didn't realize at the time, I was pretty naive. I didn't know that there was a whole field of organizational development
Huh.
and organizational leadership. But as I came back to introduce the world to my discovery, I discovered that, you know, like a lot of things, it had already been discovered. So, but I built a career in that space. I've been doing this now for 20 plus years.
Yeah, but that's cool because I mean, yes, it already existed, which maybe was humbling a little bit in that, oh, I guess I'm not planting a flag here, but
No.
also get in that, oh, there's already an industry that I can take what I've learned and run with.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
captive
It
audience.
helped me find, it helped me realize there was already language for a lot of what I was trying to do and what I thought I had discovered. Um, I think one of the benefits of coming into it sideways the way I did was that I had already made the real life connections between principles and results. And so it wasn't academic for me. It all felt very real. And so I was driven to figure this stuff out and to make it. I think that's a major driver for me. Even though leadership and organizational development is a very well-traveled trail, um, I believe that, and this is why I wrote the book Train to Lead, is I still feel like a lot of the concepts are very abstract for many leaders or very academic. And even though they may be written about in a way that feels very exciting and tangible, I find that a lot of leaders have a hard time knowing how to incorporate them into their life.
Mm,
And the major part of that, not to digress, but I think is because we underestimate the degree to which leadership development is really about developing the person of the leader.
mhm.
And if you just view it as a skill or knowledge set or a position, you're just not going to be able to make it work because so much of leadership comes out of who you and I are, or whoever the leader is, that if you don't start there and kind of embrace that that's part of the deal, that if I don't yet know how to lead a scenario or how to deal with my team, there's probably personal change that needs
Yeah,
to
it's an
happen, not
inside
just a
job.
new technique.
Totally.
And that's so,
No, I see that as like an inside job. The other thing that keeps going through my head when you were talking about that is because of your experience in disaster relief and going to all these different countries and being in all these different situations, the one word that just keeps popping in my head over and over again is empathy. I would think that you've got to come at it with just this level of not just understanding, but like wanting to understand where someone is coming from. Did that feed into your work quite a bit?
yeah, well, I think both sides of it. I mean, just being very candid. There's
Yeah.
that definitely I went in, I think, with that empathetic attitude and perspective. And then I also went through a very jaded, beat up experience where I didn't care anymore. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. Anybody who's been through those environments, I think, maybe not anybody, but many people understand that. Eventually you just kind of, they call it compassion fatigue, or just getting burned out, or all of those things. But you see life where all the contrasts are turned up. The whites are much whiter, the blacks are much blacker, and it's all, like very extreme. And if it can fry you.
Yeah.
And having to come work through that and come back to it and come back to a place of finding that empathy again, was an important part of my journey in that.
Was that when you moved more into leadership development, coaching, stuff like that? So that was a conscious decision to maybe wanting to pivot out of that space, or
I was getting, it was a couple of things. I moved out of the space in part because I saw that most of the people who were in the space for a very long time, and I want to be, I guess, careful or respectful in how I say this, but it's a difficult space to stay in for decades. If you're, I don't know how to say this. There's some odd characters that stay in
yeah,
that. It's a hard, difficult world to be in where you don't maintain relationships very long, where relationships move and change, and there's an artificial intensity to things, and it's not artificial, but it's I think it's artificial for how we're designed as humans. Like you can't live in that space all the time, and the
right.
people who choose to do that, I mean, you have some saints out there and then you have just some kind of people that are motivated by other things.
Yeah.
Um, and I just saw that I think for my own personal health, I knew eventually I wanted a family and all of these things, and it wasn't going to happen running around some of those environments. So I came back and I was hired to lead a nonprofit, and we focus specifically on consulting to small nonprofits and to small government groups and organ tribes and so on. And that's how I kind of formally got my start into the consulting space in that regard. And then over time, I began to see that, I mean, just the truth of it is a lot of these organizations are very small because the leadership in them wasn't motivated to do things the way that were needed to be done to really have the size and efficacy required to make the changes they wanted to make. So I started working on larger organizations. And then, interestingly, part of my background in disaster relief is I saw that we measured success by the economic health. That was one of our measurements of success, is at what point did you start to see businesses open back up, particularly businesses that were selling things you didn't need for life.
Right.
You see music stores open up and you see, things like that. And you realize, okay, the economy's fine. They got discretionary spending abilities, the term that we would use. And it helped me realize that, oh, functioning, healthy businesses are super important. And in fact, they're, to be honest, now I believe one of the major drivers of social health or dysfunction, but they're just major players. And so I became more interested in businesses over time. And so I don't exclusively work with business, but that's mostly where I'm at now.
Did your, I don't want to say new career, but kind of pivot into this new area, did it take off quickly as a business, or was it kind of a slow burn for you?
It was super slow and painful.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it
Talk
was
about that.
it was a very slow learning curve. I had to work through a lot of mindsets that I had about business and how to make it work. The nonprofit model that I started out in was not the right model for what I was doing. And so it just took me a long time. There's a lot of um, this has helped me build empathy is I made so many mistakes building my own business that I feel like I can empathize now when I'm working with, leaders that are trying to figure it out.
Totally.
I can understand how you can get stuck in your own head or with a mindset for far longer than you should, but I can get it because I've done all of it.
When was it when you said it was kind of a slow start, was there a point where it's like, okay, boom, we landed this client, or was there a particular time frame that you can look back on and go, ooh,
Mhm.
that was kind of it? What happened there?
Yeah, there was I mean there was I would say it was like turning a dial. There was like several or a bunch of little chunks. One of the things that motivated me, there's what's his name? John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire. Is that still around, that podcast?
I'm not sure. I don't know
I'm
it.
not sure. Anyways, it was a podcast and he would interview, I think, a new entrepreneur every day. So he had interviewed, thousands of people. And he had mentioned that um, he noticed that many entrepreneurs finally made it when their spouse became pregnant for the first time. And he called it the baby bump. And that's what happened with me. My wife became pregnant with my oldest, who's now 13. And the fear of like, I chose my life, my wife chose me, but this kid didn't choose any of this stuff, and I'd better make it work out finally. And so that motivated me to hire a coach, and who the first thing he started addressing with me, which wasn't what I had asked him to help me with, was my mindsets around money and just how I saw life. And that's what began kind of the process. It was for me, it was hiring him, and then I hired another coach later. And really was unlocking mindsets that were holding me back. And that was mind blowing for me how much it wasn't the economy I was in, it wasn't the services I was offering, it was the way I saw life and saw
Yeah.
myself and saw things that were holding me back and limiting me. And once I started unlocking that, there was I would there was like about a 5 year period of time that turned into a dramatic shift. And so
Yeah.
where I'm at now is not anywhere recognizable to where I started, but Yeah. So there was no quick fix for me. I don't sell quick fixes
Yeah.
either because I haven't experienced them. I sure look for them, but that was my part of my journey.
That baby bump that you're talking about is funny. I haven't thought about this in a little while, but when I was in my early 20s, actually when I was getting out of the military, we were talking about that earlier, but when I got out of the military, I was thinking I was going to be a lifer. Like I had a good experience. I signed up for another 4 years, re-enlisted with the intent of going to Berlin, Germany at that time. And
Mm,
I guess Department of the Army knew that the Berlin Wall might be coming down soon because they didn't
okay.
tell us that, but orders got canceled, which meant my contract was null and void, which meant, I had a decision to make, either re-enlist for something else or get out. And I don't know why. It was like literally the only time in those 4 years that I think my wife and I were just thinking about like, yeah, maybe we're gonna have kids. Maybe we don't want them to be army brats. So I was just like, yeah, I think I'm out. And so I get out without a college degree, high school education, and the job offers weren't really like rolling in. So I don't know why I thought I could, be a businessman or run a business, but I found this small business and gave the guy a little bit of money up front, and he carried the note. And kind of like you, I was like, well, I mean, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I get, someone else will hire me. And I'm not kidding. I think it was a week, maybe 10 days max from the day I started that business that my wife said she was pregnant. It was like, I
Oh,
mean, we just
wow.
said the words, maybe we should start trying, and it happened.
Yeah.
But it lit a fire, because there's
Yeah.
just this, we're bringing another human life in here. The sense of responsibility just went up big time. And I guess that could be good or bad. That pressure for me was good. It just meant
Yeah.
like we're not failing, period.
Yeah.
We'll make mistakes, but this is gonna
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I had a similar experience. It was like I need to the one common denominator that I had experienced was me. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I need to change that. I've got to do something different, or I'm not going to be able to offer the future I want to my family. And so I think that's important. Not that everybody should go out and have a kid so they can succeed in business, but it's a good, fear is a powerful motivator. And I think sometimes it's helpful.
Totally. What are you, I mean, I want to get into what you're doing now and your services now, but
Yeah,
since we're on the personal side, your own personal journey and personal
sure.
development, what do you continue to do? Because you mentioned, hey, I'm light years ahead, almost unrecognizable, I think you said from before. And I feel the
Yeah.
same way in a lot of these areas. I went through my own money mindset stuff as well. What do you do now to kind of, sharpen the axe?
Well, I still work. I mean, I'm a coach and I do
Yeah,
really well in that space, but I
right.
still have at least one coach that I'm working with all the time because I find I just need somebody outside of my brain that is able to provide another perspective. And the entire relationship is, I mean, you can do this with friends as well. And I do have peer relationships. That's another thing that I do is there's a couple of different uh, peer groups that I go to, and I travel to this a number of times a year. Mastermind groups, there's different names for them, but there's two particular groups that I go to. One's a very high level consultants that I connect with, so because we understand kind of that space. And then the other group is mostly business owners. Um, and that one I just show up as a business owner, not as a consultant. But I just find being around people, it's like in athletics, you train better if you're training with people that, if you're working with a running partner or you're working with a training partner, you just have somebody who's pushing you, somebody who's spotting you. So I think those two things are really important. I read a lot. I connect to that. Um, I think those are probably the three main. And then my clients,
Yeah.
working with clients, there's always new scenarios or new situations that I'm trying to figure out or help them, or I'm trying to get faster at helping somebody get from A to B as opposed to the 3 month process. Is there a 1 month way to do this? And so I think just I think all of those things keep me moving forward. And then I just have I'm not I'm a curious person, meaning I'm curious about things. And so I think I'm always trying to figure out something new, which just
Sure.
drives me into new areas that I don't understand as well as I want. So I keep pushing into it.
Totally. Yeah. And that's where I mean, the most successful people I know have figured out that learning and growing is just a never ending part of things. And what I've found is, and I still violate this sometimes, is all things are going good and I get busy and I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't need to be paying as much attention to that right now. And then slowly, and then I go, wait, I haven't worked with a coach in like a year or two, and I
Mhm.
tend to, um, rotate them out, not because I don't think they provide value, but because I think they do, and I want to get a new perspective, right? So
Right.
I tend to work with someone for 3 to 6 months. I'll come back to
Okay.
some people sometimes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'll go 3 to 6 months and then try somebody else. But so I'm curious, couple of things. When did this is your third book that came out, correct?
Yes.
And so when did your first book come out? And what was that process like?
Yeah. So that book was called Conflict and Leadership. That came out in 2018.
Okay.
And process of the like why I wrote it or the like
Well, I guess I know it's a very big. Sorry, I'm gonna pause for a second. Okay. No, I'm curious more about, yeah, when did you decide to write a book? And then I have not written a book before. Everyone
yeah,
tells me it's just a major task. You've written three now
yeah.
inside of 6 years. I'm guessing maybe inside of five. Yeah, what was that like? Why did you decide to do it? And what was that process like?
Yeah, so I was encouraged by one of these mentoring groups. So I
Okay.
was with a group of high-level consultants, and actually the coach that I was working with who kind of led that, um, he was learning about me and some of my background. And part of my background was I was a mediator, and I had developed a lot of skill and experience in dispute resolution. And he made a comment like, "Oh, if you don't write this book, I will." And then all the peers in that space were like, "Yeah, you need to write this book. This is such a unique thing that you do," which didn't seem unique to me at all. Um, and so, anyways, that's partially why I wrote it. And part of that came back to this disaster relief experience. One of my assignments that I was on was in Sudan, and this is during one of the wars in Sudan. This was back in 2003. It's towards the end of that phase of that war in the South. And I was assigned to try to part of a team to develop recommendations for how the agency I was with could transition to supporting peace. And the research team, there was four of us, and the short version of the story is the leader of the team and myself ended up in this intractable dispute. And we split the team and ended up doing two different studies on peace building and giving two different reports on peace building. And we were both sent separately to counselors afterwards to work out our issues. The counselors had to know what to do. They didn't know how to help us with why we were in a dispute. But the irony and the embarrassment of that, of going there to study peace building and make recommendations on it, and not being able to get along with my team, um, it hurt really, and it was really embarrassing. And but it was real. It happened. I did it. And I needed to understand it. I needed to understand how to handle these situations better because it was not the first unresolved conflict in my life. And so that began a long kind of a stretch of studying. And eventually people started pointing out, like, you're really good at handling these scenarios. And I started to be invited into it. So I started pursuing that officially. And long story short, I was encouraged to finally write a book about it.
Cool. And it looks like it did really, really well. And then tell us, a couple of things here as we get into our last few minutes. First, because you do a lot of stuff, you do work inside of organizations, from what I
Yeah.
understand, and then you do high level individual coaching.
Yes.
How do you find clients or how do they find you? How do you work with people?
Um, Most of my clients are either repeat clients or referrals from existing clients. And that's the vast majority. And then the other chunk comes from when I'm speaking, usually at a conference. There's people that meet me and want to work with me. In terms of the work that I do, the short version is I actually it's similar to I think you have an assessment on your website. Like, do you want to grow, scale, or exit a business? Or I think
Hmm.
that's the language that you use. And so really, I'm working with those same dynamics of leaders who are trying to quickly grow a company. They're dealing with succession, so they're bringing in new leadership, and or they're exiting. They want to grow value in the company, or they've acquired a business and they want it to return value. But the bottom line for all of those is a very healthy company
Right.
that operates well, and the only way you get and maintain that is with a good leader and or good leadership team. And and so I work on both sides of that, primarily working with the senior leader or leadership team to help them optimally perform, and then strategically to help them understand how to grow their organization. Um, but within dynamics, at least similar to what I saw on your website, very similar dynamics. So it's usually these very highly, I guess to use uncreative English, dynamic dynamics, but of growth or leadership transitions. And I like it because there's a lot going on. It matters to people. It's interesting. There's change. It's different when you get brought in. Like in the past, I get brought into a company that there was no vision, no real ambition. They just wanted less fussiness around them. That wasn't interesting for me to work with. I like working with people who have vision and drive and they're trying to create something or get somewhere,
Sure.
or hand a legacy off or something like that. I think that's just generally more interesting work and
Yeah,
more
I think
satisfying.
that survey that you saw on our website, thanks for checking that out. Yeah, it's more around, we obviously do, talent acquisition for
Right,
leadership, right? So what we're doing a lot of times is working with founders a lot of times where they're looking for, again, at the end of the day, a healthy company, but sometimes a
right,
healthy company so that they can have a one-time event, right? Whether that be an exit or an IPO or a fundraise or whatever, and really trying to assess the leadership team that maybe got them to $20 million is not the leadership team that's going to get them to 100,
right,
and helping them go through the emotional part that they might be the head of that leadership team, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
and I don't do as much of the coaching, but more of some of the advising on who might be good to bring in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And that's super important because it's a very, I'll reinforce it. Like what you're offering is very important because um, yeah, not everybody that can get a company to a certain point either has the skills or sometimes just the desire.
right.
There's a company I'm working with now where they had a great leader come in to do a turnaround in the company, and he was the right person for the job, just personality wise, and he built it up to about 20 million. And but he just wasn't he had so much emotional intelligence and empathy and able to connect, take a really kind of a wounded team and rebuild them. But he wasn't a very structured thinker or disciplined planner. And so he retired and they brought in another leader, actually kind of promoted up another leader who I've worked with both of them. And we were able to take the company from 20 to 50 over in a 2 to 3 year period of time.
Whoa.
And so that potential was there, but it took a different kind of a leader. And the previous leader was a great leader. He was able to execute a turnaround, which is not easy to do.
Right.
Um, but he just didn't have the passion or drive or aptitude for scaling.
Right.
And the other one, I don't know if he could have done the turnaround, but he definitely was able to do the scaling. So
Such a good
uh,
point what you're making. It's like different leaders for different seasons. And
yeah,
they had the right one for the empathetic, pull everybody together, let's get this going, right? And then brought in the next person. I mean,
yeah,
I noticed in your podcast, you relate things a lot to sports and
right,
fitness and things like that and endurance and I look at it like that. It's like there's different players within a team. I think a lot of leaders get hung up in their ego and that they need to be all things to all people. But I mean, I think the
yes,
best thing you can be is self-aware.
right,
Just go, I am really good at certain things, and I'm just not going to be the person for this, right? And
right,
in the scenario you gave, it's almost like what my brother-in-law, I'm traveling right now, and my brother-in-law and I were watching a documentary that's on Netflix right now about the Olympics, the basketball uh, Olympics from last summer, right?
yeah,
Super intense. The
right,
Serbian team, the French team, of course, the US team. And going through that, looking at the US team where you've got, 12 Hall of Famers, six, I think, are
yeah,
already in, right? You got LeBron James, you've got Steph Curry. And watching these guys that are making like 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year, biggest names on the planet, understanding that at different times their role is to support, at different times
Right.
their role is to dish that pass. You know what I mean? And it's like
Yeah.
it's really cool to watch. But I think it's the same way in leadership, you know?
Yeah. And, I think leaders, you don't always have to change out leaders, but I think understanding your skills and your gifts and knowing when need to begin to rely on someone else,
Yeah.
and I think that's a trap that many leaders, especially in smaller companies or founders, get stuck in, is even big companies. I mean, this was the Jim Collins discovery in his book, Good to Great,
Yeah.
was that, the leaders of the healthiest long-term companies were not leaders who were the white knights riding in and being kind of the central focus of the company. They were serving the company and trying to see success across the company, but they weren't making it about themselves. And I think that's tricky. That's
Right.
tricky.
Well, I think you can, when you're self-aware, I sometimes see, especially in larger organizations, and I don't know if this is a great example or not, but I always see leadership, CEO level, larger organization, um, as a bit of a conductor, and understanding that if I'm not the person, like in the example that you gave, to be the driver, had that first leader of that company stayed in as the head leader, of at least recognizing that maybe I need to bring a CRO or a COO in that's
Yeah.
going to be that person and really let them run with that part. I mean, yes, they're
Yeah.
reporting to me. Yes, I'm going to have some guidance, but I don't have that. They do. And that
Yeah.
is such a tough thing, I think, for some people to admit at all levels, you know?
Yeah, it can be. And when I'm working like with exiting owners, for example, one of the toughest things is like, hey, this company needs to be great without you. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
got nothing to sell. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
And that's a tough real recognition because for many of them, for smaller companies, it's like it is about them. They're the one who does everything. It's like that's, I guess that's good for you, but if you want to sell this, you have to not be needed here.
Right.
And are you okay with that? And are you okay with elevating other people into that role? And that's tough. But it's for the people that accept it, they can do really, really well. And I don't know that they necessarily, yeah, the self-awareness and understanding your impact, kind of like just for my own story about how long it took for me to recognize, like, oh, I'm the one who's limiting my own success.
Right.
And when I'm hired, and I had employees, and it's like my own success or my ability to drive success is impacting them. Like I'm holding back their futures.
Sure.
And unless I just accept that and realize I need to change something so that the people that I impact can have a better future, then that's not a great statement about me if I'm just going to limit it to what I'm comfortable with or what I want. And so I think that not that every company needs to grow, but I think leaders need to, and that's what I was interested about in Train to Lead was how to create a model for leadership growth that is easily digestible.
Hmm.
Because I think there's so many great research, so much great research, so many great leadership topics out there. As I said earlier, it's a well-traveled trail. People have been looking at this and talking about it and studying it for forever. But the problem with a lot of it is a new leader, a new CEO will go to a conference and get really excited about a concept, accountability or ownership or vision or strategy or whatever the thing is. And they won't understand when and where to apply that, if it applies right now, and what personally is needed beforehand before you're able to execute some of those things well. And so you see leaders with these very kind of cut and paste leadership philosophies, and it's all jumbled up. And pieces of it may work really well, and pieces of it don't. So I wanted to basically, am I going in a direction that's okay?
No,
I'm kind
no,
of,
you're good. You're good.
yeah.
Yeah.
So part of my background is in athletics and fitness. I practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I was a strength instructor for about 12 years, kind of as a side hobby. And one day I'm leaving the gym and I thought, why is it I can take an athlete, let's say a runner, and give them a plan. Like if they have a race coming up in July, I can give them a training regimen that will have them peak right before that marathon in July. And I can do it to the day. Why is it with leaders that when we're bringing in a new person into a VP level or a new person as CEO, it's like, hey, here's a couple of books, here's a conference you get to go to. Now don't screw up. And that's like at best what most of them get in leadership training, if they get that.
Hmm.
And I wanted to see, can I take some of the principles from how you design a good athletic training program and apply them to how you would design a leadership growth path? So that if somebody had 90 days and they're going to have this new seat, how can they become their best self in 90 days? Not the best leader on the planet, but they're at their highest level
I
in
love it.
90 days or in
Yeah.
180 days or whatever the time frame is. And so that's what the book was, that's what it's designed to do is help people understand of all of the things you need to know about leadership. There's a million topics. Which are the ones that I need to know right now? And how do I grow and kind of learn as much about them as I need to right now and then move on to the next thing? Because you're not going to master any one topic either. And that's, I think some leaders get stuck on that. They really want to master
Right.
priority management, time management. That's all that they want to do. And it's like, really you just need to get a little bit better at it. Then you move on to the next thing. And then you come back and revisit it again later.
Sure.
But
I think, yeah, that is such a cool concept. And like you said, I mean, imagine if companies did that. Hey, you were slated for promotion, right? Right now it's hypothetically March. You're slated for promotion end of June. You're training over the next 3 months, in addition to your day job or whatever, right? But this is the stuff that you're going to work on over the next 3 months, and then we're going to revisit mid-June and kind of see where you're at. And not only would it be good for the organization, but the individual would go in with a level of confidence that they'd be at their best, right? They'd be at the best
right.
they've ever been at
Yeah.
before, which is amazing.
Yeah. And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of leaders that I find, especially executive level, any level. But I work mostly with executives, is they can get stuck second guessing themselves in decisions because they're afraid of all of what they don't know. And
Right.
they've developed an awareness. If they have any level of humility at all and self-awareness, they recognize there's a lot that I don't know. Maybe I was a COO or CFO for years and I'm working right next to the CEO. And I've been thinking, man, if I had that job, I would do it better. Once they get the job, they realize, oh, this is not the job I thought it was.
Right.
And mostly it feels totally different than I expected. When all of the bucks stop with me, that's not always a great feeling. And and I don't know what I don't know. That becomes really acute to people. And so helping people understand what do you need to know so they have a framework for
Yeah,
it.
the
Well, if
clarity
I
of
know
it.
these things, I can act. I don't have to know all of it, but if I know these basic principles, I can get a whole lot done. And that's really good enough. Now
Yes.
you want to keep going, but for basic functional leadership, you don't have to know all of it.
No, I think what you're helping people do is take something that can seem so enormous that you almost don't even want to, you don't know where to
Yeah.
start, right? It's like
Yeah.
cleaning up after a frat party or something. It's like,
Yeah.
and just going, no, it's really just this. Like focus on
Yeah.
this funnel. When you get done, yes, you can expand and stuff. The other thing that I think is really cool about your background when it comes to people scaling up and then exiting is you've got not just hands-on experience, but educational experience in both the mindset part of the owner,
Yeah.
when we were talking earlier about, but it's my baby, I want to be needed, now I got to give it off to someone else.
Right.
We get our identities wrapped into our business so much. And even if
Yeah.
someone goes, look, on paper, that makes no sense. I get what you're saying. Their identity is still there. I mean,
Yeah.
until it gets unraveled and it gets attached to something else. And you've got a really unique perspective and a unique skill set in that you can work on both sides of this. You can work on their mindset at the same time as going, here's how we get your business from 20 to 50 million, right? We're going to work on your
Yeah.
mindset. And some
And then there's the
fundamental things
practical
within the
steps
business.
of
Exactly.
what do you
Yeah.
need to do. Yeah, yeah, and that's the part that I find to be really interesting and fascinating is, and honestly, that's probably, I mean, I love, it's fun to take a company from 20 to 50 or 50 to 100. That's just fun work, especially when um, the companies become easier to run and the owners or executives have more time to spend with their family and more, they're more at peace with themselves. They're healthier physically and all that.
Yeah.
That's fun for me. But the other side of it that I think really makes it intriguing, because I started out in this nonprofit space, is I do care about people
Yeah.
and the personal change that can happen for somebody, the transformation that can happen, I think it's just it's kind of a cool thing that
Of course.
something as at least in Hollywood is so kind of cut and dried and just about money, like business. I mean, really, it doesn't feel that way to almost any of the clients that I work with. Like it's very much, especially in the smaller, medium-sized business space, I find most executives and owners are very aware that their employees' futures are dependent on them, their mortgages are dependent on them,
Right.
their ability to get their kids through school. I mean, they're usually carry that weight. And so helping those people, I think, succeed and get some of the benefit of all of that hard journey to build what they built. I think all of that is, I don't know, it's just fun for me.
Well, it's great work, and I appreciate you coming in and sharing your story with us, Christian. And I'm looking forward to our paths, continuing to cross. You got an impressive background, and it's really good to get to know you a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. It's been an interesting conversation.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Yeah, take care.